Hello and welcome to Ex Cult Ed, the podcast where I share my experiences, thoughts and feelings after leaving the truth, otherwise known as the 2x2 way, the fellowship, the one true way. You get the picture. My hope is that in sharing this it will be cathartic for me and perhaps make you, dear listener, feel less alone if you've been through or are going through something similar. This is my story. This was the final episode of the original 4 that I recorded. In this episode, I talked about whether or not I was actually in a cult. I've since decided that I was in a cult, but it's still an interesting reflection to look back on. Good old Wikipedia says a cult is a group of people who have a religion or a set of beliefs. In modern times, the term cult usually does not mean a mainstream religion, but a group set up in opposition to a center of established authority. New Age religions were often called cults because they were thought to be deviant social movements. Cults have beliefs or practices that many people think of as being odd or that most people in the world do not practice. More than that, cults have often been led by people who were not elected and control the group according to their own wishes. The objective is to prevent the faithful from thinking critically and making choices in their own best interest. That was definitely true of the religion I was in. Wikipedia has a list of 5 things that define cults. So number 1 is people are put in physically or emotionally distressing situations. I wouldn't say that was true in the religion I was in, although I would say that it is distressing for people who want to leave, but being in it and following it exactly isn't distressing. Number 2, problems are reduced to one simple explanation which is repeatedly emphasized. That would be true of the religion, given that anything wrong would come down to pray harder, you need more faith and you need more love. There's one thing in my notes that I took from missions that says the shortest distance between a problem and a solution is the distance between your knees and the floor. The one who kneels to God can stand up to anything. There was also an email going around saying, I've learned that there is little I can do in my life that will make me truly happy. I must depend on God to make me happy and meet my needs. So generally with any problems you have, the solution would be to focus on God. Number 3, they receive what seems to be unconditional love, acceptance and attention from a charismatic leader or group. I would probably answer this with a maybe. We believed that we had unconditional love from Jesus and God, and we believed that the workers were supposed to love everybody, but not all of the preachers were charismatic people, and we didn't really have a person we looked to as such, apart from Jesus. That being said, we did put all the workers on a pedestal and treat them as special because they were God's chosen ones to speak his word, and we were all supposed to look up to them. And we did go to the workers for advice. A lot of people did. Number 4, they get a new identity based on the group. I suppose this one is true because professing in baptism made you now a child of God. It wasn't like you got a new name or anything, but once you professed and were baptized, you were God's child and not of the world. We all identified ourselves as being separate from the world and prided ourselves in being different and looking different. And number 5, they are subject to entrapment, isolation from friends, relatives, and mainstream culture, and their access to information is severely controlled. I would say yes to this one, given that we weren't supposed to have televisions or radios and that we weren't supposed to listen to mainstream music or do worldly things like dancing or drinking, which is pretty mainstream culture. For example, I went to my cousin's wedding who wasn't in the religion, and at religious weddings there's no dancing or music. So this was actually the first worldly wedding I'd ever gone to, and they asked everyone to come up and join the bride and groom in their wedding dance, and I was so excited and jumped up to dance straight away. However, my 4 cousins who were in the religion and at the same table as me remained seated. Basically, the only people who didn't join in with the dancing were those who were in the religion. Why? Because it's a worldly thing and we're not supposed to do it. And I was a rebel. But this behavior is actually very separating, and it implies that you're somehow too good or too righteous to participate in such activities that really don't harm anybody. We had a saying in the religion, what we admire we soon desire, and what we desire we soon acquire, which was basically a warning not to look at or want to do things that aren't of God. And finally, from Wikipedia, cults have a management style that is dictatorial, however you say that word, and exploitative. The beliefs of all these cults are non-tolerant of other systems and beliefs. A requirement of membership is to obey absolutely without questioning. Their interest in the individual's development within the cult towards some kind of satisfactory individual adult personality is very low or non-existent. That's definitely true. It was selfish to focus on yourself as an individual and your needs. We were supposed to love God first, others second, and ourselves last. I think this lack of questioning and critical thinking is one reason why I was so frustrated and disconnected in general conversations conversations with people in the religion because they were happy to discuss and tell stories that confirmed their belief. But if conversation turned to questioning or critical thinking, a lot of people didn't want to have anything to do with that because it was dangerous territory. I was very curious as a youngster and I asked a lot of questions, but often I was met with pray about it, because if you questioned, it was seen as doubting, and doubting was a sign that your faith wasn't strong enough. So it was a very dangerous thing to be asking the wrong questions. It was just a sign that you needed to pray harder and read your Bible more. There are already negative things out there online about this religion that I was in, and we were strongly discouraged from reading that. So now I'm going to look at some other things that Google says: zealous commitment to the leader. That is beyond just admiration. It's seeing their leader's teachings as law and refusing to accept information from any other source. I guess we were all committed to God and Jesus, and they were all seeing and all knowing, and their views were absolute truth. We did view the Bible as the word and the law, and like I said before, we did view the workers as being above us and people who we'd go to answer questions and ask advice from. And we were brought up not to question the workers. And of course, the Bible was seen as the be-all and end-all, so I guess so. Another thing from Google is the group delegitimizes former members. According to Google, former followers are always wrong in leaving because the group can't see any reason to leave. Therefore, former members are dismissed as being bitter, angry, dishonest, evil, or immoral. This actually makes a lot of sense because say you're in a community group or a bowling group or a volunteer group, there's always a legitimate reason to leave, like just life in general most of the time. And if you say you can't do it anymore, nobody views you as a bad person, hopefully. But in this religion, it's different. There definitely is no good reason to leave in the eyes of those inside it. Personally, for me, this is definitely true. Since leaving, I have had family members saying that I must be on drugs. I have had warnings from people telling me of the dangers out there and how sad my mum would be about me leaving. Nobody in the religion asked me if I was more happy outside of it. I think they see me as a misguided and lost soul who's bitter about the religion. I will give an example of this in an email I received from a member of the religion a bit later on in this podcast. The next thing on Google is group members ostracize outsiders. I would say in the religion I was in, they're not supposed to do this, but it is something that often happens. I saw it in other people who left the religion, and I felt it in my own leaving of the religion. People just stop talking to you. Some of the ones who really knew you may keep in contact, but on the whole, a lot of people just forget you existed. I don't know if it's out of fear of you being a bad influence on them or their family, or if it's just fear of you. They might warn their children not to be like you, or not to read your blogs or listen to your podcast because you're a bad influence. But apart from talking about you, they probably won't make such an effort to talk to you. After all, you're a completely different person now you're not in the religion, right? You must be completely messed up. So yes, I'd say ostracizing is real on the whole, but it's not something that is supposed to happen in the religion I was in. Next thing is the group is paranoid about the outside world. There is a strong us versus them mentality. I would say definitely yes. We would refer to ourselves as the flock of sheep and lambs that Jesus took care of, and the world as being the wolves. When we referred to the world, we weren't talking about the whole world, we were talking about the world outside the religion. So there was very much an us and them. One of the hymns we sang went like this: "One day too late, many will wait, stand knocking outside of the gate. Jesus will say, depart ye away, the door is now shut, it's too late." And we were all scared that we would be the outsiders. Nobody wanted to be the person stuck on the other side of the gate. I was actually scared of people with tattoos when I was in the religion. I thought they were bad people. My now partner had to show me otherwise, and now I think people with tattoos are just like anybody else. Some are maybe even sweeter because they wear their heart on their sleeve, literally. Next one is members must abide by guidelines set out by the leaders. Well, that's definitely true. We had a lot of unwritten rules in the religion. Supposedly it was all based on what was written in the Bible, and a lot of things could be found mentioned there. However, there were some things that I had trouble understanding, like why women were supposed to dress modestly but not wear pants. And by pants I mean jeans, not underwear. We definitely all wore underwear. Anyway, if you're riding a bike or a horse, then wouldn't pants be more modest than a skirt? I asked about that, and I was told that you should go by the situation. It's okay to wear pants while riding a bike or horse, but not to the shops. It all goes back to the Bible saying that women shouldn't wear men's clothes and men shouldn't wear women's clothes, but that also confused me because pants and jeans are women's clothes. Those pants are specifically made for women, and a man would look ridiculous wearing them. We also weren't allowed to wear jewelry, but we were allowed to wear wedding rings. But isn't a wedding ring also jewelry? I guess you're allowed to wear jewelry if it has a purpose. Hair has to be worn up at all times in public and not down. One way to pick members of the religion was if you saw a lady with her hair in a bun wearing a skirt or dress and no makeup. But I'm just not sure why God would care if his followers could afford hair ties or not, but apparently that was a thing. We weren't allowed to wear dresses with no sleeves because it was worldly. Basically, if I wore a dress that showed my shoulders, I felt really out there. Also, clothes were supposed to reach your knees and not be shorter. But again, why would a God care if you could afford more material on your clothes or not? We were also not allowed to have TVs because they were seen as worldly, but for some reason we could have computers and the internet, I guess because everyone needs the internet these days. But I'm not clear where in the Bible it says that a TV is a bad thing because TVs weren't even invented back then. The argument was that it was something that took away time that could be spent on God. But we could have books, which take ages to read if you ask me. So yes, I'd say we had some pretty arbitrary rules that we all followed. The next thing that Google says is the leader is not accountable to other authorities. I would say no to this one, just because there was a strong belief that God was above the law and above everything of this earth, but there was also a strong view that we need to obey the law. This was because Jesus said in the Bible, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's and to God the things that are God's, which meant that you obey the kings or rulers as long as it doesn't interfere with your service to God. So generally I'd say this one didn't apply in the religion, mainly because we were all encouraged to obey the law, including the preachers, as long as that law didn't interfere with our service to God. So if you're in a country where it's communist and you're not allowed to serve God, members would still be finding a way to do so there, which is against the law there, but they view that as the only instance where it's okay to break the law. There were instances of sexual abuse within the religion, which did come out in the media, and of course a lot of that was kept under wraps and not spoken openly about. After I left the religion, we were watching a YouTube video of pedophilia within religions, and as Morgan put the video on, I was like, I know those people, and they were preachers that I had had stay in my home in the religion. However, one of our head workers did send out a letter saying that if this was happening, they encouraged people to speak to the authorities and report it. So it wasn't like they were going to intentionally hide it. It just wasn't something people wanted to talk about, especially when it comes to the reputation of the workers. They didn't want to discourage others in the religion. They didn't want to give the religion a bad name, not to mention the unspoken shame of the victim. At one point, when I was in the religion, I was reminded not to dress too provocatively for the sake of the brother workers. Read into that how you will. The next one on Google is shame and guilt are prevalent. Followers feel they can never be good enough. That is definitely true. If you listen to the last episode about why I left the religion, you'll hear a lot about the shame and the guilt that I felt. And the more shame you felt, the lower you felt, and so the harder you tried to be more faithful, because you believed that only Jesus could lift you back up again, and you also felt shame because you were always sinning. Even a bad thought was a sin, so you couldn't not be sinning most of the time. The next one is the group uses thought reform methods. This includes brainwashing, or if your serious questions were answered with cliches like pray about it. I don't know if our hours of being in meetings and reading our Bibles and praying counts as brainwashing, but I definitely think we were only encouraged to think one way, and that was that this way is God's way and the one true way. And I do think that that thinking is a bit dangerous because it takes away personal responsibility. Take climate change as an example. In the religion, everyone believes God is in control and God will take care of his own. So it's wonderful for them because they're not worried about the future or anything, but it's dangerous too because they're not worried about the future or anything. It takes away personal responsibility to each other and to the planet in a way because God's in control and he will provide. Another answer that people used to give was that we don't need to know everything because God knows everything. There was the view that God knew the bigger picture, but we didn't, and so we just had to trust that God would take care of things. And I think that in itself takes away from your ability to question things or think critically for yourself, because you have this belief that no matter how hard you think, you're just a person and God is far superior. His brain, his mind, whatever God has is far superior to our mere human thinking. I think this convenient idea of a God that's in control of everything, it's great for the person who believes it. It takes away any sort of personal responsibility. It takes away the stress as well. You don't have to worry about the future, about anything. But at the same time, it prohibits the people who believe that from doing something to make a difference, to make a positive difference. I think it's also very dangerous because even though in a religion you're supposed to care for others, having the mindset that God's in control and God will take care, I think it takes away your ability to really see other people in need, because you can easily turn a blind eye and think that God has it under control. There's a lot going on in our world right now. There's a lot of people suffering. It's wonderful that there are religions out there collecting donations and using those to help people in need, but I think there's also other religions out there who are using God as an excuse, whether consciously or not consciously, to avoid thinking about and feeling uncomfortable and doing something about these issues that are around us. The Bible speaks of earthquakes and wars and rumors of wars and all these terrible things. So as they're happening, people in these religions, they say it's the sign of the times. They don't look at it and think, maybe we caused these issues. Maybe we humans did this. Maybe we can do something about it. But instead, they look at it like this is part of God's plan. This is inevitable, so we don't need to do anything. And I think that that's unfortunate and that's dangerous. And it's one thing that prevents all of humanity coming together when people hold those beliefs that there's nothing we can do. The biggest one that we all used to follow was faith starts where logic ends. So again, it's saying don't think for yourself, just have faith in God. The next one on Google is that your group is elitist. They have the view of we have the truth and you do not. Cults see themselves as the enlightened and the chosen ones, which creates a sense of unity and purpose. Definitely we saw ourselves as the one true way. I mean, the fact that we called ourselves the truth is a pretty good answer to this question already. So yes to this one. We would feel sorry for the people outside the religion because they hadn't had the opportunity to know God yet. We felt like we were the ones who would be saved. We would go to heaven. We hoped we would go to heaven. Nobody went around saying they would go to heaven because, back to the shame thing, we were all sinners. We just had to hope that we had a good enough relationship with God to get us to heaven. But we did believe that only the people in our religion had that chance. Only the people in our religion could be saved, which is a small number of people. We were of the view that we were not capable of making our own decisions for our future and that should be left in God's hands. It really does create a psyche of helplessness in a way because you aren't in control of anything. God's in control and you just have to obey him and be good and you'll be fine. The next one is there's no financial transparency. I have no idea about the finances of the group. There were no formal donations, however many families would give money to the preachers, but I don't know where that money went. Say for conventions, we would get workers come from interstate and from overseas. So their flights would have to be paid for by somebody. And things like hiring out town halls, somebody paid for that. When individual members decide that they're going to become a preacher, they will sell their car and their house, and that money will either go to their family or they will give it to the work. So there's obviously a bank account somewhere that all goes into. I actually think that the people who are workers are completely dedicated to the religion. I don't believe that they are involved in any kind of scam that they know of. But I think that there is a chance that there could be someone at the top that's benefiting or profiting off this. The workers in the religion were genuine people, and I think if it is some sort of a money-making thing, it's a very good one because nobody at the top has to pay for the preachers. The preachers live with the members look after them, and the members donate money for the preachers, for the whole, for running conventions, for those kinds of things. But even conventions are run by members of the church. They're held on the grounds of people with rural properties. So yes, there is no financial transparency. Next one is the group performs secret rites. According to Google, cults use secret rites as a passage to solidify a member's loyalty to the group. They are often confusing and bizarre. Well, I have described how professing and baptism works in an earlier podcast, and I've also described conventions and special meetings and how most of our worship was not open to the public, but I'm not sure how confusing and bizarre it is. I mean, I grew up with it, but I suppose to an outsider coming in, it would be a little bit bizarre. It's not ludicrous though. And the last one from Google is there is nothing worth pursuing except the group's goals. I'm going to quote a hymn here that we used to sing, which went, nothing matters but salvation in this world or that to come. So tick to that one. And I can just say it's no easy thing going from believing that nothing on earth really matters because you're just a traveler going through to your real eternal life, and then trying to switch to the mindset that this life is all we get. It's definitely not an easy switch to make. The last thing that I have from my notes that apply to this point would be Jesus is the way, always has been the way, and always will be the way. He is the way to walk, the truth to believe, and the life to live. So as you can see, that doesn't leave much room for anything else. I'm going to go into some of the beliefs of the church that I would question. We would say that Jesus offered his life as a sacrifice for us, and that this debt for our sin could not be paid any other way except that he died an excruciating death for our sakes. But why? Why would God need an innocent person to suffer for us just so he could forgive us? Isn't he all powerful? So couldn't he just say, I forgive you and be done with it? Why was our debt not payable any other way? In the religion, they believe that God takes care of his own. So with the topics like climate change or terrorism or anything like that, they're not worried because God will take care of his people. But if God loves the whole world, why wouldn't he be taking care of those who aren't serving him? Wouldn't he let those who are serving him die so they can go on to eternity with him because they're right anyway? Wouldn't it make more sense to keep the sinners alive so that they have a chance to make things right with him and not go to hell? Also, if one of God's people do die, they say they were ready and God took them in his time. So if there's a big event and all of the people in the religion are safe, then it's talked about that God took care of them. But if someone does die, it's said they were ready to meet God. So either way, it's God's doing. It's also said that everything that happens is either God planned or God allowed. So that means that all the terrible things going on in the world, God is allowing to happen. But why? Why would a God who wants to save everyone's souls, to have them part of his family, allow people who haven't even met him yet to be killed in horrible ways? There are so many religions out there, so many different forms of Christianity, and we were only a small group, a tiny group. So why were we the only ones that were right? We looked on all other religions and all other ways of life as being wrong and misguided, and that if we could only show them God's way, they could be saved. We felt sorry for people who we deemed to be sinners, and we felt thankful to be safe and protected in God's fold. We were the lambs taken care of by the shepherd, or the chickens under God's wing, which I guess makes God the massive hen. We were faithful soldiers for Christ, going out to, well, definitely not kill, I guess shoot the enemy with love darts like Ribrianne from Dragon Ball Super. Another thing I find dangerous about this religion and others is that it says in the Bible that all sins will be forgiven except blasphemy against God. Blasphemy is basically not respecting God, saying things against him or making fun of him or saying bad things about him, which reminds me of Mr. Trump or any country with a supreme leader that you're not allowed to say anything bad against. Now, the reason I think this is dangerous is because everyone who followed this religion in particular was super careful not to say anything bad about God, because that would be an unforgivable sin. So if you thought anything bad about God, you were scared, because that was a slippery slope and a dangerous path to go down. Now, I think a God who is all-powerful and all-knowing shouldn't be afraid of a few little people saying some bad things about him, but making it an unforgivable sin to say something one time means that even if people think something they're not supposed to, they won't say it because they don't want to blaspheme and be condemned to hellfire forever. We used to talk about being captive to Christ as though that was a good thing. We were willing captives by choice, and we were proud of that. Before I left my husband, we had some workers over for dinner, and they were sitting at the table with us talking about how selfish it is when marriages break down. These were two women who had never been married, of course, sitting there saying how that there are so many people in unhappy marriages but putting God first as they're supposed to, and those that leave their partners are so selfish. I guess those ladies hadn't thought about the mental health of both people stuck in an unhappy marriage, not to mention the children who definitely would pick up on the negative vibes between their parents. I mean, unhappy people either fight with each other or avoid each other, but either way, it's not a good environment for children. And I would argue that leaving is the least selfish option for everyone involved. If everyone is unhappy, what kind of life is that? I believe that religions such as this one encourage people to focus so hard on serving God to the detriment of their own mental health, because your physical and mental happiness doesn't matter. Your soul and having joy in your soul is what is important. I remember in the religion they would talk a lot about acceptance, about accepting where you are, accepting your place. So it doesn't really encourage people to want to make a change. You won't see people in the religion trying to stand up for women's rights or anti-racism or whatever, because again, God's in control. We're not in control, and we should just accept where we are. And what's the point in trying to change a world that you're just passing through anyway? One way they would make you feel especially bad is by comparing your situation to somebody else in the Bible. Like, if Jesus could do it in his situation, so can we. Or if Paul and Silas could sing God's praises when in prison, you can worship God anywhere at any time, no matter your experience. I believe that this attitude can be damaging because it causes people to push down their mental health issues because their situation is not as bad as that of Jesus or Paul and Silas or whoever. Let me tell you, there will always be someone with a worse situation than yours. And there will always be someone in a better situation than you. But that doesn't mean that your feelings and emotions aren't valid in the situation you are in. Just because one person has been through the same thing as you and maybe has not been as upset, that doesn't mean you can't fall apart. You're absolutely allowed to feel sad, angry, and whatever you want to feel. And I think religions such as this one can cause people to push their feelings down, hide them away, and put on a happy face because that's what Jesus would do. There was a hymn that says, "Show a little bit of love and kindness, never go along with hatred's blindness, take a little time to reach for joy and wear a happy face." It doesn't say be happy, it says wear a happy face. And that's my problem here. We were led to believe that a joyous person was more righteous and more close to God than a sad person, which leads to the belief that those who are calm and happy are in some way above those who aren't, which then leads to those who are going through difficult experiences not to talk about it because they're supposed to wear a happy face and be joyful and praise God. In fact, after Mum died, I did have a preacher talk to me about how wonderful it was that regardless of what she went through at home with my father, my mother never talked to anybody about it. She never brought it to the church. And that was apparently a good thing. Now, I would argue that if you're experiencing any kind of mental or physical domestic violence in the home, that you should talk to someone about it. If the church is your community and your support, they should be there for you through it. They shouldn't be encouraging you not to speak about it. And I know of people who've had a lot of trouble in the religion, even with their own family, who have refused to accept that they actually had a mental health disorder. I was even told when I was in it, why would anyone need a psychologist when they have God? Which is flat out dangerous. If you need help, seek help, and not just from God, from human professionals too, because maybe, just maybe, God helps those who help themselves. So perhaps this group does fit the description of a cult. However, I wouldn't necessarily say it's a damaging cult. If someone fully believes in it and is fully immersed in it, it could be a good environment for them. But for me, being in the religion had very bad impacts on my mental health. I am reluctant to say anything bad about it generally because I believe that some people are genuinely happier for being part of something. So for those who have good family and friend networks, the religion actually works very well for them. They're surrounded by people, they have sings, they have convention. It's actually amazing, and the feeling you get when you're part of something, you're singing together with people, it can be good, especially if the people around you are uplifting you. And if they think you're somebody good in the religion, if they think you're somebody worth looking up to, then it's a good place to be. But if people around you think that you're a bad person, you're a bad influence, or if you're a single parent and people are scared that they can catch singleness somehow, then it's not such a pleasant place. I think being in such a religion can be very draining and very damaging, and especially because you can't defend yourself. Jesus talked about turning the other cheek, so causing any sorts of issues is not something that one does in the religion. You try to keep the peace, you try to be a good person, and there's only so much that one person can take. No matter how much you smile and you don't say anything and you take what comes your way, even a boxing bag will only last so long. For the sake of my mental health, I decided that it's time to surround myself with people who uplift me, with people who make me excited about life and excited about my future. And that's the reason why I'm here today. I think it's dangerous to not talk about your issues, to have this mindset that you just need to pray about it. The way to be happy is to lift everyone around you up and surround yourself by people who lift you up. And so judging and shaming, even though it comes along with a lot of religion, because religion involves pointing out how we're sinners, I think that's one part of religion that I don't think is a healthy thing. I think instead of looking at the sin and the shame, it would be amazing if we looked at the positives, at what we as individuals are trying to do and what we could do to be better people, rather than looking at the bad person that we are. And perhaps the group still has some sort of hold on me, which would be a sign of it being a cult. Or perhaps I just don't really want to say bad things about a group of people that I spent my childhood being around. And I want to add that they're mostly very good people. Granted, some of them can be judgmental and rude, like some I've mentioned, but every group will have some bad eggs in it, so I wouldn't judge it by those individuals, even though they're definitely not helpful. But what I will say is this: once you're part of that religion, it is very hard to leave. I left once and then I went back, and then I left a second time 10 years later for good. It's hard to leave because you do essentially have to cut a lot of ties, and when you leave there will be many friends and family in the religion who will cut you off because you're a bad influence. But those who keep contact with you will make you feel guilty with little comments saying they're praying for you or what a dangerous world it is out there. As an example, I will, as promised, share with you some emails I received after leaving the religion. So this one says, "I pray for you daily, Larry. This pandemic isn't only pandemic, it's God's word simply being fulfilled as time marches on. Already the world is like as in the days of Noah, perilous times when men are lovers of their own selves before being lovers of God. Very serious times." And another email said, "I recall you weren't there last year and my heart and many other hearts are very heavy for you, missing you so much. As kindly and as sweetly as possible, I want to remind you, whatever you're feeling, thinking and doing now will not annul any of the big promises you've made in life, because all three are before God. Your choice to profess, your baptism to God, your marriage, all three are forever choices. And there is a fourth, not a choice but an appointment. It's the day when every person will bow before God and find their place in heaven or hell. For those who have known and chosen God at any time in their life, the consequences are extremely dire. The Bible tells us it is best that that person was never born. If you believe this or not, it doesn't matter, because there's no change and no other way, and it's too fearful to trifle with. It's all detailed in the scriptures, not to terrify, although it does, but to warn. As well, you have the temptation of your inheritance. It was intended for your safe, happy future and not a prodigal son experience. If I could kindly as give you just one suggestion to 100% guarantee your happy and safe future, it would be to read your Bible and pray every day and never ever stop. These are only the very most kind of all kindest loving words. Age truly brings wisdom. You are so young, and I know the young think they know. I did too. The big wheel of life eventually turns around to your turn. It equates to being right or wrong. There's no middle road. However and whatever you're feeling doesn't change the fact that should you turn up at our door any time, any year, you'd be taken into loving arms and thankful hearts. No story needed. So you can see how there's a lot of fear about leaving the religion, and how those who have believed it once find it hard to get fully away from it, and the worry of what if. Addressing that email directly, I understand, of course, that it came from a place of care, because that particular person believes fully in the religion and they care about me and they're worried about my soul. And so that's why they're trying to reach out and bring me back, of course. But whatever it is, I felt more isolated and alone when I was in the religion than I ever have felt outside of it. And that's coming from a person who's had to completely start again making friends over the last 3 years. In that religion, you have a fear of the outside world, and you think you'll have nothing in common with people who don't hold the same beliefs as you. And I found that I have something in common with pretty much everyone around me, if you just look deep enough. And I actually have had a lot more interesting conversations with people outside the religion, because they're open to questioning their beliefs, they're open to debating their beliefs. And I think an important thing in life is to be open to letting other people question our beliefs. You should be able to think critically about how you formed your beliefs and what your beliefs are. And healthy debate and healthy conversation is necessary for us to move forward and for us to find solutions to things. You don't have to hold the same beliefs, and you don't have to have the same lifestyle, but I believe at the end of the day, if we all look hard enough, we can find some common ground. I no longer believe in us and them, or sheep and wolves, or a massive hen guarding its chickens. We're all just people trying to enjoy life. And I will say this in conclusion, in leaving the religion, I have stepped out of the light and into the darkness of the cold and cruel world, but I have never felt more enlightened. And personally, for myself, I feel more like I'm totally in the light, and that the religion is a dark hole that I ain't going back to. I think some of the views in the religion can be very dangerous, as I've discussed. And I know that a lot of people in the religion refuse to see another way. They refuse to see that they could be wrong, because thinking that they could be wrong is not having enough faith, and not having enough faith means that they might not get to heaven. So they're too scared to even go down that thought pathway. As soon as questions come in, they will pray for forgiveness for doubting. I think that sort of control and that sort of reluctance to critically think is one of the biggest signs that it is either a cult or a borderline cult. I also think that my struggle, and the struggle that I've heard from others who have left the religion to adapt to being a normal person and to see themselves as part of the world, because it was just natural to me to talk about things as worldly and talk about the world and the religion, even when I was outside of it. And that took a lot for Morgan to understand what I was talking about. He had to keep pulling me up in it and being like, when you're saying worldly, I don't understand what you mean. Or when you're saying the world, I don't understand, like, what are we talking about here? That hold that the religion has over people, that difficulty for people to leave and to see a life outside of it, that does make it seem more like a cult, because they're not even afraid to leave. They just can't even consider leaving. They don't see how. They don't see how they could be happy. They know, because that's how strongly they feel about it, that if they leave, they're going to hell. I know of people in the religion who have been told not to read my blog and not to take notice of the things that I say. And that is because they are afraid of the influence that I might have over people in the religion. But what I would say to that is, if you're right and if your beliefs are right, then then reading other people's opinions, reading other people's point of view, it shouldn't change anything. You should be able to hear other people's point of view, and then you should be able to come back with your own debate about why you're right. Or if you can't come up with a reasonable explanation about why you're right and they're wrong, maybe that's an opportunity for you to look at your beliefs and examine your beliefs and question whether you really are right or whether maybe there's another way to life. I think it's a very scary thing when a group of people just refuse to look at opposing views. When I was traveling, I met some amazing Muslim people, and I met some amazing atheists, and I have also met some amazing Christians of other denominations from the one that I was part of. And I've met some amazing Buddhist people too. I don't think that religion needs to define us, and I don't think that leaving a religion should be a defining factor in whether you're a friend to someone or not. I have different beliefs now than I had when I was in the religion. I have a different outlook on life, but underneath I am the same person. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. I really appreciate you. If you'd like to reach out, ask any questions, vent, say whatever you need to say, even if that's getting annoyed about something I've said, email me at exculted@gmail.com. That's exculted@gmail.com. And always remember, you can walk your own way, speak your own truth, and live your own life. Bye!